Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video we will be talking about the polling errors from the 2020 election and sort of applying those errors to this 2024 election map and seeing where it plays out, and it really gives Donald Trump a huge boost in the 2024 election polling when you consider that factor, because polls in 2020 underestimated him so much across individual states, but also as a nation. The popular vote was off by quite a few points, and then, but even more apparent were some state polls like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan that showed huge leads for Biden, but they really ended up being very close in the margin of error, actually, between Donald Trump. So I filled in the safe or almost safe states in the 2024 election, which fills up about half of the electoral votes. Joe Biden has 148, Donald Trump has 132. Just realized I missed Illinois, that would be likely, so Biden now has 167. But looking at the national polling right now, we see in that the head-to-head matchup, Donald Trump leads by 0.5% on average in the Real Clear Politics aggregate. And on this day in history, Biden in 2020, Biden was leading by 7.2%. So you can just see how much better Donald Trump is doing this time around, this election, than he was back in 2020. You know, a 0.5% lead is small, but it is such an improvement from where he was in 2020, because he was down 7.2%. So it's not the fact that he is only leading by 0.5%. It's the fact that he is doing 7.7% better this election as of now than he was last election. Because when you look at the states, there were so many states that were under 7.7% in terms of margin. That's Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Donald Trump flips all of those and he already gets a win. Minnesota would flip. Virginia would almost flip. New Hampshire would flip as well. But that's not even the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is the polling errors from 2020, because, you know, when you consider those factors, that's one thing. But considering the really underestimation of Donald Trump in the 2020 election and applying that same underestimation to the 2024 polls, it gives a huge boost to Donald Trump. He is almost guaranteed a landslide victory when you consider that factor. I mean, he wins by a huge margin. So looking at the remaining 239 electoral votes across many states, let's just start with Arizona just to get a feel of what I'm talking about with this polling error. We see that in 2024, this is the 2024 polls, Trump leads Biden by 4.6% today. 4.6%. Now in 2020, Joe Biden was projected to win the state by 2.6%. He only, this is the 2020 map with 2020 margins. We see that in Arizona, Biden only won by 0.3% in 2020. So that means that polls overestimated Joe Biden by a total of 2.3%. Now looking again at the 2024 polls, we can expect Donald Trump to do 2.3% better than what the polls are projecting. That would put him at a 6.9% victory, an absolute colossal victory in a state that went to Biden in 2020. Not only is this a flip, but it's a flip that goes to Trump by a likely margin. That's an over 5% margin. Now, this is what I mean when I say when you apply this polling, these polling errors from 2020, it gives Trump a huge boost, because you see that Arizona already flips, and not only that, it's a likely state. Now just imagine what we regard as blue states like Minnesota and Virginia and New Hampshire and Maine. What happens to those when you apply this same polling error? Now let's move on to the state of Colorado. Now, I don't know exactly, we don't have exact aggregates of the polls, but when you look at the polls, we see that Biden leads by 10 against Trump in the two-way. Biden leads by 10, by 4, by 5, by 6, by 8, by 13. So we see that the average is about 8% when you do the math. And in 2020, polls were projecting that Biden would win. Now, this is a very rare example, because polls in 2020 were expecting Biden to win Colorado by 12.5. He won it by 13.5. So the polls underestimated Joe Biden in Colorado. Now, that is a very rare example, but I do want to pull it up because that does prove that in some states, polls can be wrong. While the nation as a whole way overestimated Donald Trump, some polls in some states can underestimate Joe Biden. So this time around, now polls showing that Biden will win by 8. We can expect him to win somewhere by 9 since the polls underestimated him. But again, a very rare example. Now let's move on to the state of Florida. Now this was a major polling error, a major fault of the pollsters back in 2020 because the pollsters said that Biden would win Florida, and they said he would win it by 2.5%. What do we know? Trump ended up winning Florida by about 3.5%. So that is a 6% underestimation of Donald Trump. Now looking at the 2024 polls, he's now up by 9%, 9.1. So when you apply the 6% underestimation from 2020, that puts him at 15.1%. And that makes Florida a safe state in the presidential level. That is something we have not seen probably since 1984 with Ronald Reagan. We can actually check here. The last time Florida went safe Republican, yes, I was right, was 1984 when he won it by 30 points over Walter Mondale. So, Florida polls are indicating when you apply the polling error would go safe for Donald Trump. Now moving a little more quickly here. We see that Georgia, a critical battleground state, today Donald Trump leads by 5.3%. Now in 2020, polls would say Biden would win by 1.2. He only won it by 0.2, so that's a 1% overperformance of Joe Biden back in 2020. So applying that to 2024, we see that Trump would actually win by 6.3%. Now, polls are already looking good for Trump in Georgia, but a 6.3% margin is really something that no one was expecting a few months ago. Now let's move on to the state of, we can move on to Maine because we only have a couple polls coming out of Maine, but we see that in the at-large vote, they split their votes between at-large vote and general and congressional district votes. We see that in the at-large vote, Donald Trump leads in 2024 by 6%, just 6%. Now back in 2020, Biden was leading by 13. He ended up winning it only by 9. So that's a 4% underestimation of Donald Trump. So applying that to 2020, he would win by 10% in Maine at large. 10%, which is a 19-point shift to the right from 2020. Imagine if something like that were to happen. Now in Michigan, in 2020, this one was a big shock in 2020 considering how close it was because Michigan went to Biden by 2.8%. Now the polls were indicating that he would win it by 7.9%. So that is a 5.1% overestimation, not overperformance, but overestimation of Joe Biden in 2020, 5.1. Now Trump currently leads by just 0.6. If you give him 5.1% more, that puts him at 5.7%, and that hands him the state of Michigan by a likely margin, another critical battleground going to him. Now moving on to Minnesota, we see that today Biden leads by 2.4% in the polls. 2.4% is very narrow. He won it by 7.1% back in 2020. In 2020, Biden was expected to win the state of Minnesota by 9.2%. He only won it by 7.1%. That is a 2.1% overperformance. By Donald Trump, I guess you could say, or underestimation of Donald Trump. So when you apply the 2.1%, we see that Minnesota is actually reduced to just a tilt margin in a state that Trump won by so much, in a state that Biden won by 7.1%, so much in 2020. We see how this race changes when you apply all of these polling errors. Then we have Nebraska, which at large isn't a close race, but we do have the 2nd congressional district, which is. Polls are saying that Biden will win this by 5, but in 2020, we see that in the, I believe this is just the 2nd congressional district. Probably since it was the only close race. We see that polls were expecting Biden to win by 3.8. So he actually overperformed here because he won it by 6.6. So this would stay likely Democrat. Now let's move on. let's see, to Nevada, another critical battleground. And we see that in 2020, on Election Day, Biden was leading by 5.3%. 5.3. Now, he won it by 2.4. So that's a 2.7% overestimation of Joe Biden in 2020. 2.7. Now, in 2024, polls are already saying Trump will win by a lot, too, by 5.3%. That, when you apply the 2.7, that puts him at an 8% victory in Nevada. Another, Biden state from 2020 that's going likely Republican in 2024. In New Hampshire, the average, when you look at the average from the last three polls, we have 4% for Biden, 3% for Biden, 6% for Biden, and then even. So when you average those out, it is about a 3% win for Biden in New Hampshire. Now in 2020, we see that Biden led by 11, and he won it by 7.4. So that's about a 3.5% overperformance by Donald Trump in New Hampshire. And again, in 2024, polls are saying that Biden will win the state by 3%. So Trump overperformed by 3.5 in 2020. So Donald Trump would win the state by a tilt margin when you apply that error. And I'll mind you again, this went to Biden by 7.4% in 2020. A likely Biden state now flipping Republican. Imagine that. Then we have New Jersey, a state that the Trump campaign is eyeing. We see that in 2020, Joe Biden was leading in the polls by 20.4%. He only won it by 15.9. That's a 4.5% underestimation of Donald Trump in New Jersey. 4.5%. Now in 2024, we only have a few polls, but they're saying that Biden will win by about 6% when you average them out. 6%. So New Jersey would be reduced to just a very narrow, lean margin win for Joe Biden there. Then we have New Mexico. This is 2024. We see that Biden leads by 8, by 2, by 11, by 10. So the average appears to be about a 7, or really like a 7% margin. So this was against DeSantis. So it would be about a 9% margin when you average out the polls for Biden in 2024. Now, in 2020, Biden was expected to win by 11.7. He only won it by 10.8, which is a 0.9% overestimation of Donald Trump. So it doesn't change that much. New Mexico would stay likely Democrat. Now let's move on to the state of, let's see, did I characterize New York? Yeah, yes, I did. So we're going to move on to North Carolina now, which Trump did win in 2020, I'll mind you. However, Biden was expected to win in 2020. Polls were indicating a 1.8% win for Biden in North Carolina back in 2020. Trump won it by 1.3. So that is a 3.1% underestimation of Donald Trump back in 2020. 3.1%. This time around, Trump is expected to win by 6.1%. So that would put him at a 9.7% victory. A huge margin in North Carolina, adding yet another likely Republican state. That was close in 2020. Ohio, today in 2024, Trump leads by 9.3%. In 2020, get this, Trump was only leading by 0.8% in polls. He won the state by 8%. That's a 7.2 underestimation of Donald Trump in Ohio. This might have been the biggest polling shock from 2020. So 7.2. Looking back at 2024, he would be winning this by a safe margin when you add in the 7.4 or whatever it was, 7.2 percent victory there. So Ohio goes safe Republican. And I'll actually change Iowa because there was a similar instance in Iowa. So that would be safe as well. So now, let's move on to, Pennsylvania, one of the most critical battleground states. Trump leads by 1.6% today, 1.6%. And in 2020, Biden led by 4.7. Now in 2020, Biden won the state by 1.2, so that's a 3.5% overestimation of Joe Biden. Applying that to the 1.6 that Trump leads by, that gives you 4.7, right under the 5% needed to make it a likely state, but still, it does go to Donald Trump, and it goes to him by a lean margin. Now, as we near the end, in Texas, I did not characterize Texas. In Texas in 2020, Trump was expected to win by just 1.1 percentage points. He ended up winning by 5.6. That's a 4.5 overestimation of Joe Biden. Now looking at 2024, Biden was overestimated by 4.5% in 2020. Applying that to the 2024 map, you see that Trump just crosses 15% to make Texas a a safe Republican state. Wow, that has not happened in quite a while now, since 2012. That was actually the last time, but polls are indicating now, with the error, that Texas would go to Trump by a safe margin. Just really astonishing to see this stuff. In 2024, in Virginia, there have been a flurry of new polls that show a shockingly close race in Virginia, and this isn't even including the Fox News poll that just showed another even race in Virginia against Trump and Biden. But when you consider, let's say, the last 5 polls, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we see that on average, Biden leads by 2% about, so we have 1, 2, 4, and then 2 even polls. So he leads by about 2% on average. But looking at 2020, Biden was expected to win Virginia by 11.8%. He only won it by 10.1%. So that's a small but 1.7% overestimation of Joe Biden. Now he's expected to win by 2.1%. So this would make Virginia stay with the Democrats, thankfully for them. However, it is only a very narrow tilt margin win for Biden in a state that he won by 10.1% in 2020. Imagine the reaction that would happen to that. In Wisconsin now, our last state in this experiment, we'll say. In Wisconsin, Biden leads by led in 2020 by 8.4% on election day. In polls, 8.4%. He only ended up winning by 0.6. So that was a 7.8% overperformance by Joe Biden. Underperformance, overestimation, we'll say, for Joe Biden. That was one of the largest in any state. 7.8. That's huge. And in 2020, we see that Trump is already leading. He's up by 0.9%. So when you apply the 7.8, that gives him an 8.7% margin, making Wisconsin now a likely Republican state. So Donald Trump wins in a landslide with 318 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 220. And Minnesota and Virginia are excruciatingly close. These could very easily go Republican, which gives Donald Trump an even bigger margin of victory, right? But as of now, the polling errors do indicate that Virginia and Minnesota do stay with the Democrats, giving Joe Biden 220, Donald Trump 318. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It helps out a lot. In the algorithm, drop a like, leave a comment, all that stuff helps. But most importantly, again, make sure to subscribe for more videos, turn on the notification bell. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.